everyone. Thank you for coming to this political arts event. My name is Bee Vong Duchen. I'm the online editor for the Hill Times, as well as the editor for Power and Influence magazine. So we're here to talk about pragmatism and idealism in the public service. And these are some of the themes found in the play, The Public Servant, that many of you will probably see tonight. First, I'd like to welcome our panelists. You already know Larry Rousseau. He's the Regional Executive Vice President of the Public Service Alliance of Canada. Larry was first elected for the National Capital Region in June 2011 and was re-elected in May 2014. He was previously a Regional Vice President with the Union of National Employees and a former Statistics Canada employee. And next to him we have Jennifer Bruin. She's the author of The Public Servant and the director as well, and stars in it, I think, as well.
No, I'm not an actor.
Oh, you're not in it?
No,
Okay.
no. I'm a terrible actor.
No? Okay. So she's also the artistic director at Theatre Columbus, based in Toronto, and she's worked with British Columbia's Caravan Farm Theatre, the National Arts Centre, and has created productions at the Canadian National Memorial in Vimy, France, to commemorate the 90th anniversary of the Battle of Vimy Ridge. And finally, at the end there, because of last-minute extended votes, NDP MP Paul Dewar wasn't able to come tonight, so we're grateful to have Keith Eglai.
Way better.
We'll try.
He's a city councillor for Ward 9 in the city of Ottawa. He was first elected in 2010 and was recently re-elected and currently serves as the chair of the Transportation Committee. Keith has been a labor lawyer for 20 years and has been a backstage hand for a number of theatre and dance productions in Ottawa West in recent years. So thank you all for being here today. And to start, why don't each of you speak briefly about the state of public service and why this play resonates? Larry, go ahead.
Start with me. I still am an employee of Statistics Canada, so I'm on, of course, loan to the union full-time because I was elected into the position I hold currently. I still consider Statistics Canada to be my home department. I've only worked at Statistics Canada. I wear a ring very proudly. It says 25 years. I am eligible for the 30 years. And looking forward to the 35. However, if I stay in the union, I know I won't be retiring at 35 years. So, that's the thing. We all look forward to retirement, right? I met someone just today who was saying, I've got 6 years left, and I'm already counting the days. I said, that's not good. I said, usually in the last couple of years, you're counting the days. But it's gotten that bad. It's gotten that bad right now that the pride, the commitment, the devotion that we have for serving the public, unfortunately, is much tarnished, is much damaged over the past several years, maybe, even longer than the current government has been in place. But I really deplore that more and more the theories about public management tend to favor importing private sector management practices into the public sector. It's not a good idea, never was. My hero, Jane Jacobs, said, we are guardians. We have to protect the public interest, and traders have to protect the profit motive and the profit interest, and never the twain shall meet. Unfortunately, the gurus that be do not understand that. But I think people are starting to get it, and we're looking forward very much to the election in the fall. Rightly or wrongly, we're not supposed to be politically active. We're supposed to be impartial, but I have never seen a prime minister in the history of Canada who has made the public service so impartial in that regard. In that, I think that now it's almost becoming unanimous that most public servants realize that this is unsustainable. We can't go on this way. So I didn't think that after 30 years of service that I would be speaking to a crowd of people with this kind of a discourse. Public servants, mainly in the main, are very proud of the work they do. That's been my experience. And if you're going to stick it out for 25, 30 years, you better believe it that we're entitled to a damn good retirement when we're done. And that's what it's all about. And increasingly, that doesn't seem to be the promise of the future. So I think I'm going to end it there and hear from others, and then we can have a really great discussion.
Okay, thank you, Larry. Jennifer?
Jennifer Bruin, I'm the director of the play The Public Servant, and I'm a co-writer of the play. So the play was written by 4 people, including myself, 3 other women. And so I'll give you a little bit of background of the theater company. Theater Columbus, now called Common Boots, we changed our name last month. We are a company that's devoted to creating plays collaboratively. We create them through collective creation with a writer, sometimes without. The company's been around for 30 years, and so our plays are known to be ensemble-based plays, character-driven plays, if that means anything to anybody, but they're a driving idea for our work. So I became the artistic director of this company about 6 years ago, and as I sort of cast about to think what's the next collective creation we'll do, I I remember the moment when it happened. Collective creations take a long time to make. They're a grueling process. A bunch of people get in a room together, and we like to think we create it democratically, but we actually create it through consensus. And it's difficult and challenging and fantastic, and it's an exciting process. So when I cast about, I thought, what is an idea that can sustain that challenge? And the play, The Public Servant, the original title that it is, it came about from a couple of sources. And there was a project that was done in Vancouver where it's a one-night event in Vancouver, and I never remember the name of it, but a performing artist is put together with a professional. So they had a pastry chef with a cellist, and they had, I think, a clown with a real estate agent, people who are devoted to their careers, and they created these short pieces. And I thought, that's kind of fantastic. And I thought, what would be the strangest combination for a sort of physical theater-based artsy company to as a subject matter? And I thought of what are subjects that are important to me, what are ideas that are important to me, and the idea of the public servant is an important idea. And so I thought, I remember laughing at the time by myself, thinking, well, that's a great combination, let's do that. The other source of it came, in fact, years before that, when I was working at the Caravan Farm Theater, a theater company out in the Okanagan. And everybody was sitting around, and everyone was playing guitars, and they were playing all these labor songs, and they were playing all these songs of social justice. And I said, why, these are the heroes, or the subject matters of these songs, and great art is around these leaders who are saving their people. And I thought, I sort of said at one point, how come you never do plays about people who get budgets in on time, who get the financial statements done? Like, doesn't that make society move? Doesn't that make us happier, healthier, more secure? And everyone, like, no one knew what I was talking about. I didn't really know what I was talking about. But I was sort of defending all of us who are really working hard to get the grant in on time, or to make that argument, that 2-page document, into a paragraph so everybody can understand what we're talking about. And so I've always held this idea that the civil servants there's a level of heroism for all of us who are in the back rooms, and we don't talk about it. And I wonder if that can sustain drama. So I set to, then I approached 3 young women I know whose work I admired. They were all, in fact, they were all known for their sort of classical training and their classical experience on stage. And I approached them and said, here's this idea, and it was a really loose idea. I just said I'd like to do a play about public servants. And we met probably a total of about 12 weeks and created this work. I had a different idea of what was going to happen to it, because I've read books about it, I've paid attention to it in a different way that these 3 women had. So they were coming to it a little bit new. 2 of them are from Ottawa, and so had grown up around public servants and its role in this community. And we set to, and we actually wound up interviewing people. So I sort of thought we'd go more into this theoretical place, and we'd study policy discussions and how did the Norwegians do it and how did the Japanese do it, and they kind of weren't interested in it. And in part because you can't play theory. As actors, you can't do that. So we interviewed a lot of people, and we interviewed people, and sort of they came into 3 different categories, I guess. We interviewed people who had retired, a lot of the people I knew. I call them Trudeau's children, and they were the people who came of age in the 70s. And so that world, that ethos, and then we came to the people who were sort of my age in their mid-40s and 50s who were hired in Ronnie Kretchen's time, because there's this big gap, as many people know, and then this current crop of young people. I've got 1 minute left, which is good, because we can talk about more things. So really, we went in and we interviewed these people, and this story came about, they created these 3 different characters that represent those 3 different times. And then the other note is, as we started to improvise around their ideas and their situations that they had created, that people had described to us, we followed, we followed Joseph Campbell's heroic journey, and we took that as our ideal for how to structure our play. And we sort of found different stories that people had described to us that could fit into a young hero who is challenged along the way and what happens in the end. So then my final thing, and there's more to talk about around this play. So we created this play, we premiered it 2 years ago, and then Eric boldly and bravely invited this play to come onto a main stage. So a couple of things around that is people couldn't believe we wrote a play about public servants. They didn't know it would be collective creation. Nobody would do that. Nobody would do that in this country. So most people thought it was nuts. Then when it was successful, everyone said it was obvious. And we go, oh yeah, a play about women in administration, collectively created, is really obvious. So we're kind of astonished. Hugh Nielsen, who's the general manager here, we're kind of astonished the play is sold out. And it's breathtaking. And sitting in the audience, I would say it's one of the most meaningful experiences I've had. So those are the things I'll say now. There'll be more questions later, but that's the story.
Thank you, Jennifer.
Thank you,
Keith.
thank you.
Well, as you figured out, I'm not Paul Dewar. And I represent a different level of government. I do know Paul Dewar. His kids go to the same campus my kids go to. And as my middle son likes to remind me, you're the second most famous political dad from the camp. I bring a slightly different view. I'm currently a city councilor, and so in some ways, I guess I'm kind of management for a civil service or a group of public servants. At the same time, I think I wear a hat as a public servant for the people that I represent. And when we were chatting earlier, getting ready to this, and people said, well, where do you come from? What's your background? So I have worked for public bodies. I worked for the Ottawa District School Board and negotiated collective agreements for them. I've been in private practice. I've negotiated collective agreements on behalf of management and union both. And the situation at the City of Ottawa, I think, is a little bit different from the federal civil service. And what we've been seeing over the last number of years, since we brought in a program through a gentleman there who's no longer with us. He's now moved to Vaughan to become the city manager there, but he was our deputy city manager, Steve Kanalakis. And Steve, a number of years ago, introduced what he called service excellence at the City of Ottawa. And when Andrew asked me to speak, he said, I want you to speak about inspirations and aspirations of a public service. And at the City of Ottawa, I think without patting ourselves on the back too much, I think we found a way to bring the two of those together, because the whole idea behind service excellence, and I've just jotted down, I'm going to read a quote to you from Steve. Improved employee engagement drives operational performance, which in turn drives client satisfaction, which leads to improved confidence in municipal government. And so what we've tried to do is make or work with our employees so they're engaged in the idea of being public servants, and they're engaged in the idea that they are doing something positive for their city. And that's really resonated with our employees. And over the last number of years, we've been named as one of the top 100 companies to work, or not companies, employers in Canada, one of the most diverse employers in Canada, and also one of the top employers in the Ottawa Gatineau region. So we've had some success with that in giving ownership to our employees in the work that they do and for the people that they do it for. And that's sort of the highfalutin quote that you got from the deputy city manager, but as I didn't have a lot of time to prepare for this, having gotten an email last night at 8 o'clock from saying, can you do this? I also spoke to Michael, and Michael is the gentleman who works at, we call it Councillors Row, and that's where all the councillors' offices are. And Michael is kind of our watchdog, and you have to get through Michael to get through the councillors' offices. And I was chatting with Michael at lunch. He said, so I'm doing, he says, what's going on, councillor? What are you doing? Well, got any events you're going to tonight? And I said, well, actually, I'm going to go do this thing. And I explained to him a little bit about it. And I said, so Michael, you've now, he's a young man, but he's been working for the city now for 11 years. He started off as a lifeguard, and he's worked himself up to different positions. And we did talk about pension, actually. He said, I never thought of that. I've got 11 years of pensionable service, and I'm not even 30 yet. So I said, so Michael, the question I'm going to be asked is, why do you want to be a public servant? What is it? And I gave you sort of the high-end kind of answer, and Michael looked at me and says, I want it to help people. And that's an answer we get a lot from the employees of the City of Ottawa. And we're not perfect. There's a lot of work to be done. In fact, as we were chatting, one of the questions I got was, why did you run? And I said, well, I ran because I was a labor lawyer and I saw what a complete mess the OC Transpo strike was, both on the union side and the management side. You should never negotiate, in my mind, a collective agreement in the public. You shouldn't do it on the front pages. You shouldn't do it on the evening news. You should build up a trustful relationship, a collaborative relationship at the table, and work towards a common end. Because your employees are your partners. And if you don't get along well with your partners, then you're not going to be able to serve the public the way you want to. And so that's why I ended up running, because I said there has to be a better way. And I think the city is on the path to getting that better way by, as I say, we've really engaged our employees and we've seen a really positive response from them. And they're invested in their communities. And even if it's as simple as the guy who is plowing the street after a big snowfall. We're hearing stories about, the guy who took that extra step when he saw the senior in their driveway shaking their fist because he's just gone like, go back and clear out what he's put in so they can get the car out. Or Michael who answers the phone and tells people, yes, Councillor Eggle, I can see you now. But he says his first answer was, I want to help people. And so I think, in short, the inspiration, the aspiration can be all of one piece. And that is, you get the employees engaged in the work that they're doing, engaged in the community that they're serving, and they're going to perform better, and the community is going to respond better. And again, you have that partnership, and it's partly the community you serve, partly the management up above, and partly the workers that are doing the work. But if you bring them all together with a common goal of serving the residents, whether they're Canadian citizens or Ottawa citizens or whatever they are, whatever level of government, I think that's the key to moving it forward and creating that more positive atmosphere that you've indicated you believe has been lost at the federal level.
Thank you, Keith. So my first question is just for Jennifer. Can you describe the main character, Madge, in The Public Servant and how she represents a typical public servant and if or how she changes?
Madge, the story is follows Madge. We don't know where we got that name, but Margaret Taylor. And she's a young scientist. She's got her degree in public administration, an undergrad in biology and science, and a master's degree in administration. And she wants to work for the federal government, and she wants to help people. And so she goes off to be an analyst, and she is happy to do, she's in a tiny department in agriculture. That's all we know. And she wants to be an analyst, and she wants to be good at her job. And so she starts out enthusiastic, and simply put, it's the simplest story. She writes a memo, and the memo gets approved, and a project gets initiated, but it's got restrictions to it. And so her first thing is that she has to take the science out of the report, and she's not allowed to describe all the details because that will affect the health. And she complained, saying, but it affects the health of Canadians. And they say, the senior manager says, that's not your directive, that's not what you've been asked to do. So that's her first cold shower, and that's sort of the turning point in the play. And she has to make choices about her future that get challenged along the way.
Okay. And Larry, do you think this is a typical of a public servant's career? And
Oh, yeah.
how have things changed? How have things changed in your experience?
I'll never forget. I like the fact that the word idealism and the word pragmatism was used at the beginning, and I think I was a young idealist when I joined StatsCan, and yes, absolutely, you hit that wall of reality when you think you can do things and you go to your first meeting. And the first thing that's going to happen is that you're going to be brought right into line. You can't talk because there are more senior people around the table, so you have to listen. And I cannot just listen. I mean, I have to get in there and talk. And I have to say, this is what we should do, and this is where we should go. And so the first 5 years, at least, of my career was very frustrating because I had all these fantastic ideas, and yet I was running up against the wall of no, no, no. And you have to learn that. And then you have to learn how you can work around that and sort of, talk to this person and then talk to that person. And so it's fascinating, and then the next thing you knew, 25 years goes by. But
Well, and that, absolutely, that defies generations. When we talk to some of these folks who were young 30-year-olds in the 70s, and a couple of them were just incredible stories, and they said, you had to learn the system. You came in wanting things, but it was all how sneaky you could be. And they had such a good time being sneaky. And she actually said it was guerrilla tactics. So they were doing equal pay for equal work of equal value. And she and the minister, I think I can tell this story because they can't get in trouble now. So Lloyd Axworthy and Elizabeth, they'd have these secret phone calls. And they were both trying to get this thing moving forward. And they just tried all these different things. And she contacted the Americans who had been leaps ahead, had done all this work on affirmative action. And so they got all their sort of ducks in order. And she got this 65-year-old man with a bow tie who was an expert on it to sit in the panel to argue their case. So she got an old man to talk to the old man to listen to it, and she just loved that story. And she had they all had 1,000 of them, and they would meet in the morning. And so it was figuring out the game. What we found when we started to talk to this generation is that imagination for that wasn't welcomed, it wasn't encouraged. No one could quite figure out how to do that. We didn't meet those guys. I don't know if there's a department that's having a good time like that. They might be. But we certainly didn't run into that kind of imagination that was going on. Who knows if it's right or wrong? I think we came up with this loyally implement and fearlessly advise, and we would ask everyone about that, and most people laughed that doesn't exist.
Yeah, and I think that's at every level of government. I mean, one of my frustrations, because one day you're elected and one day you're not elected, the next day you're approving a $3.2 billion budget. So with very little training or background as how you do it. So one of the things, to speak to the bureaucracy is, one of the things I'm constantly saying to staff is, and this is part of working with the community, is I think there's a school that they send you to write in such a way that it's incomprehensible, because I'm constantly saying to them, you've got to put in English. You've got to put it in English so that the community understands what it is you're saying yes to or saying no to and why. And slowly, now that I work as a chair, the various departments that respond or come under my committee, they know now to send me the 3-line answer as opposed to the 3-page answer. But I still know if it's coming in on Friday afternoon and it's more than 3 paragraphs, the answer is going to be no. And I think that comes from your comment about trying to find ways around rather than the direct route, because that's sort of ingrained, I think, in a lot of bureaucracies. And we've lost sort of the direct route, whether it's because it's been pulled back or lack of measurement, whatever it is. And so there's this whole culture of how you speak, how you present.
Well, transparency was a big word everyone spoke
Yes.
to. And the
We need
idea of
far more of that.
transparency required all sorts of different language, because everybody needed to have their bases covered. So when we started this, even 3 years ago, there was one department, we got an interview and we got to walk around and meet everybody. And a year later, we weren't invited back. They said it's too stressful here right now. Too many people have been fired, and they were competing for each other's jobs, and all that was going on. So this is a play, what we wrote. This is one of the questions here, but this is the fodder that we have for a play, and people haven't seen it, so it's hard to some degree to speak to that. But one of my questions was, how is this a play? Is this an agitprop? Is this a political thing? But we really tried to find the drama and the fiction and the nonfiction of it all.
It can be dramatic sometimes, but to get back to the writing, so Keith, of course, is talking from the point that he's an elected official, he's a counselor, and he takes these decisions. At Statistics Canada, the senior bureaucrats made the decisions. We had a policy committee and made up of the chief statistician, who was a deputy minister, and assistant chief statisticians, who are assistant deputy ministers. We all wrote for the assistant deputy minister, who was responsible for our sector. And as they changed, we had to learn to write differently because if your assistant chief statistician wasn't going to bring your idea to the table and fight and defend it because he couldn't understand it from what you had written, well, then you were up the creek. So there was always somebody who was able to write well, and you would go to that person and say, can you just look at this and see if, and that person became very popular but very powerful, because then that person is actually your interpreter. And so because not everybody writes the same way, et cetera, and these things are 10-page, sometimes 12-page reports, 15-page reports, get the stats in there, the figures, the more figures, the better. And so you learn to do that, but you're writing from, I was an AS4 program officer, trying to get policy, but that then percolates up. It has to percolate up. And then at that level, that's where the decisions get made, and then it percolates back down, and sometimes it is what you wanted, and sometimes it's not. It gets changed on the way. So I think that in the federal level, anyway, we were writing for the senior mandarins. The senior mandarins right now are, and I'll use the word eunuchs, because they have been completely made powerless. I have never seen, a situation that in such little time, it took about 5 years for the current prime minister to make sure that every deputy minister and every assistant deputy minister doesn't dare come up with something, no matter where it was written in the lower levels, and that it comes up. If it has any chance of making it to the PCO, which is the Privy Council office, and then landing in the wrong hands, wrong eyes, this is terrorism, because we're supposed to be able to function, and we were one of the best public services in the world. And now this complete clampdown makes us completely ineffective as far as I'm concerned. There's no great new ideas in public management coming from the Canadian side, and we have people who were coming to visit us from around the world to learn about things that I was working in the official languages program. We were visited. I remember back in the 90s when Ukraine had just become, an independent country. They decided to go independent, and then they were trying to figure out, how do we do Ukrainian and Russian as official languages, and how are you doing it in Canada? The same thing for the Chinese who came to see Statistics Canada, because in 1996, they decided they wanted to redo their system of national accounts. Where are we going to go? Canada. Everybody told them, go to Canada, the best statistical agency in the world, you know? But doing that today, you know, like, wait a minute, well, what's the Prime Minister going to think? Is this going to work? Is it, you know, it's like, it wouldn't happen. And we took risks back then. We did things and we suggested things to the Chinese. And so when they canceled the long-form census, it was almost like out of a play. We have the Chinese coming over to celebrate the 15th anniversary of Statistics Canada having helped them with their census. You know, there's a reception in the RH Coates building, which is in the basement, and we're all having a, you know, one, and it's just been announced that the long-form census has just been canceled. And then I had, you know, these Chinese guests coming to me and saying, like, literally, WTF. You know, like, just WTF. You know, they just could not understand it. Welcome to the new world, you know. So we can't even write things anymore, you know, that are going to be taken seriously because everything's just being stopped, you know. A lot of things are being stopped. Yeah.
Keith, can you talk about your role as an elected official, as a public servant, and how that might mesh with Madge's character and the struggle between, like, politics and the bureaucracy?
I think it is a challenge because as an elected official, you come and you go. As a bureaucrat, you're still there. So it really, you really have to work at that partnership, especially when you're first elected, because, you know, as I said, you know, one day you're not elected, the next day you have a $3.2 billion budget you're supposed to approve that stands about this high. And so you need to reach out to the bureaucrats and the civil servants to give you that background. I mean, in every workplace I've ever been, and this is just me, I mean, this isn't as speaking on behalf of elected officials, but I've always taken the approach that people don't work for me, they work with me. And that's how I've always done it. And what really sticks in my head is very shortly after I was elected, an issue had come up in my ward, and I asked for a meeting with the manager who dealt with that particular issue. And I walked in, and the fellow was sitting in my office, and he was looking a little uncomfortable. And I started to talk to him, and he just sort of sat there. And then he was visibly shaken. And then it occurred to me that he thought I was going to yell at him. And so I said to him, we'll call him John because everybody's still there, so it's different from your story. I said, John, I don't want to yell at you. I said, a problem happened. I want to find a way to fix it, and I'd like to hear your ideas how we do that. He kind of looked at me. I said, no, really? And he said, you're new, aren't you? And I said, yes, I am, but right now I have, 37 emails in less than an hour and 14 phone calls. Let's just fix it. I said, happens again, maybe there'll be some yelling, but I said, right now, let's do it. And so that's my approach as an elected official. I think that the civil servants that are in place, the bureaucrats that are in place, bring a whole lot of expertise, a whole lot of information. I'll often get from residents, well, you had somebody from traffic get back to me, or you had somebody from snow removal or the finance department or whatever the issue is. And I'll say yes, because I'm your city councilor. I'm not an engineer. I'm not an accountant. I'm not the medical officer of health. That's why we pay them the dollars. And yes, we have to oversee what they do. That's the trust that you've placed in me to oversee what the civil service, what the employees are doing. But at the same time, if we've hired them for their expertise, we need to hear them out. And that doesn't mean I always agree with you. And there may be a messaging issue because unlike you guys, I have to reapply for my job every 4 years. So it's a little bit different. And so some decisions are made with a political slant to them. But again, speaking from my perspective, I think it's very important that you engage the people that you have there. Otherwise, why have them? And I'm more than happy to rely on the expertise. If we've hired right in the first place, and that's a big if, but if we've hired right in the first place and we've got the best engineers and the best accountants and the best nurses and doctors and whatever the issue is, whatever the department is, then we should use them in the best possible sense of that word and work with them and take the expertise that they offer up and use that to better serve the residents that we all represent.
I was just wondering what you think the biggest challenge is for public servants right now, and how do they overcome it? It could be for anyone.
I'm not an expert. You.
Well, I can't let that one go. So, it's political. Unfortunately, it's political. I think that, I have no doubt that Tony Clement and Lisa Raitt and politicians are there because they think they're there for the right reasons and that they want to make change. I think that they have in their hearts the idea that they're going to change something. They're going to make Canada a better place. However, in my experience, you have to believe in public administration, and you have to let people do their jobs. And there's a job to do. You can't have a country that controls the second largest territory in the world, that is only inhabited by 0.5% of the world's population, without having a very effective public service. And when you have politicians who don't believe in public service, who think that public service is the problem, you know, that bureaucrats are the problem, government is the problem, how do you reconcile that? If we had politicians who came in with the attitude of, okay, we have problems, but how are we going to solve them together, instead of saying, you don't know what you're talking about because all you want is more budgets and all you want is more money and you want more resources to fix this problem. And you know what, we're just gonna go out and get the private sector to do this, you know? And then, but it doesn't work. And like I'm saying, sometimes we have to go back to basics and read some good authors who tell us, don't go there, you know, and be very, very careful about doing that. So if a public servant is not doing a good job, yes, you don't get reelected if you're not doing a good job. But a public servant, we have a concept that's known as being put on a shelf. There you go. You know, and hopefully they'll get the message and then they'll go look elsewhere. Maybe they'll have a fantastic career in the private sector. But, you know, you have job security, and that's one of the things that makes us attractive. You know, people, I mean, ask anybody who worked at Nortel, anybody. I remember when we had programmers and we had specialists leaving Statistics Canada in 1996, 1997, going to Nortel, mortgaging their house to buy Nortel stock, taking all of their contributions into the pension plan that they were able to take out when they left and resigned from StatsCan. And then 5 years later, knocking at the door, can I come back in? And there was nothing, and I said, well, there's, you know, our Operation and Integration Division is hiring CR4s and CR3s, which is, you know, mid-level clerk position, $30,000, at least less than when they left. We'll take anything. We'll take anything. That was sad. I mean, it was sad, and it was almost like, it made me angry. It made me angry, and to the point where, you know, that's when I decided to really join the union and say, because I said, if this continues, what are we going to look like 10, 20 years from now? And it's just been that way. So I'm getting on a rant a little bit, but that is the challenge. I think she asked, yes. I said, you opened that door. The challenge that we have is political. We need to have politicians. I commend Jim Watson, okay? I commend Jim Watson because he followed Larry O'Brien. But I commend, you know, Jim and I have known each other for a long time, but I commend Jim Watson because he makes it clear that he believes in public administration. There are challenges in the city of Ottawa. You're right. I mean, you know, you've got a problem. Your constituents are calling you. right? Like, I've got a problem and I want you to fix it. So that's a different kind of thing than in the federal government, right? But I commend politicians who come in and who at least value that, you know, you've got this bureaucracy, you're gonna have to work with it and see how you can get the best out of it, not destroy it by thinking you're gonna fix it. You know, it's like the kid with the toy who can take it all apart but can't put it back together again. You know, it's like, you know, why did you do that? Okay, that's fine. Did you have fun? But let's make sure that you don't do that again because you want to have a toy that you can play with, you know.
I think one of the differences that allows us, first of all, I concur with you about Mayor Watson. You know, he is of a similar philosophy to me, that you've got these people there for a reason.
Yep.
And let's use them and work with them and make the best of the expertise that they have for the people we represent. But I think one of the big differences is that, of course, at the city level, you're not a member of any party, and
Yep.
you can choose how you want to work with a particular department. You're not told how you can work with a particular department. You know, I could never see myself running in party politics, because the idea of being marched into a room at the beginning of every week and saying, okay, we got 4 votes this week coming up. Vote number 1, you're going to vote yes. Vote number 2, you're going to vote yes. Vote number 3, you vote no. And if you have a problem with vote number 4, make sure you have a phone call or you have to go to the bathroom at the time the vote's happening. And I wouldn't be comfortable with that, because I think fundamentally the main thing that I'm hired to do, or not hired to, I am hired in a sense, to do, is to make decisions. Is to make decisions on behalf of the 45,000 people that I represent. And so that's a road that I don't want to go down. But I also think that makes a difference. You know, obviously the mayor will, you know, has a position, and he represents the city, but he still is only 1 vote. And, you know, he tries to get you on side on things and on projects and this and that, but you know, we have the freedom to work with the bureaucrats and civil servants that we have in the way that we choose to do so. And, you know, going back to the story I said, that the manager that had my office obviously had a very bad experience, or several bad experiences with previous councilors when things hadn't gone well. That's not how I chose to deal with it. And I think that gives us a bit more freedom than on the federal side. As you said, I agree. Everybody who runs for office, I think, does it for the right reasons. But once you get within a group, and there's a group mentality about how it's supposed to go this way or that way, then that has to fashion the way that you proceed and how you interact. And that's the nice thing about the city level, is we don't have to worry about that.
So one of the things that I really liked about StatCan is that you had people who believed, you know, in StatCan is a very operational agency. And so I was a kid. I was much younger. This was back in 91. I was an AS2. So that's Administrative Services Level 2. And I was put in Regional Operations Branch. And we had this huge photocopier, because this photocopier could make billions of copies, and had to, because we had to make all the manuals for the interviewers, and they were shipped out all over the country. Well, I got a presentation from this team at Kodak. Kodak was coming out with the first digital photocopier, massive digital photocopier. Now, this is when people were using WordPerfect version 5, okay, and Word 2, okay? A lot of the manuals were still being produced that, okay, you'd print out your page, but if there was a problem with the page or the formatting, you could cut and then you would paste. Cut and paste was actually physically done, all right, in order to make the manual pickety-boo, and then you go. Well, out with the Xerox copier, in with, and this was my decision. And the reason why it was my decision was because my AS4 supervisor just completely trusted me. And then the Director General sort of said, let him go. And it was a disaster. It was a complete disaster. I spent night after night after night trying to teach people how to use the codes in WordPerfect to fix their manual, okay? And they weren't interested. And after I'd spend hours showing people how to change the codes in WordPerfect or use Word to make sure that the formatting was right so that when it digitally went to the copier, when you printed off 1,000 copies, it would work, I would be walking down an aisle somewhere, and then I would see that the person is still taking the scissors and cutting, and then sneaking it down to another place where there was a copier that could actually do the manual that we could send to publications for. So you know what? We do make mistakes, but I was supported in that. A year later, the copier, this was a $250,000 copier, all right? I could have been fired, all right? But I had a senior manager and I had a supervisor who believed, who saw the enthusiasm, but actually, when I looked back on the experience, it helped bring the whole group kicking and screaming more into the digital age. That was the bigger problem. That was the bigger issue. But this photocopier made it, and eventually, yes, the photocopier was then trundled out, and we went back to a combination digital and glass copier. But it was a great learning experience. It helped this public servant learn a hell of a lesson, you know. Instead of rushing out and going to do things, make sure you've done your homework, but make sure there were so many lessons there I can't even begin to tell you. Would that be able to happen today? I'm not sure. But there was managers there willing to take risks with budgets, okay, and a learning experience, and that was a fantastic thing that I would have never been able to do even in the private sector. We did a lot of stuff like that, StatsCan. I mean, you know, there was laboratories practically, people, you know, working with the first touch screens that were developed in Canada, North America, StatsCan. Why? Because we had these interviewers who were walking around with, you know, paper and everything, and we said, if they had a computer, but that's not a laptop, because laptops were awful back then, but if they had something that they could actually just touch and with a pen, you know, with a thing that could put in the answers, you know. So that was developed. It cost millions and millions of dollars, but it led to the technology that actually does this, you know. People don't know how influential the public sector was in doing this. StatCan developed all kinds of stuff out of necessity. Thousands of people in the field wanted something like this. Believe me, it was much bigger than this. And it took time and time, and believe me, nights on the phone, you know, well, have you tried this? Have you tried that? Because we were live testing out on the field. That's something that public administration can do and that private sector cannot do. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
I know I'm
We have a
passionate.
bit of time for questions from the
Okay.
floor, if anyone wants to ask a question. Go ahead.
You started talking about pensions, and I have a very good friend who is, I'd say, balanced on a lot of issues, but he really has problems of what I will call pension envy. And it's a serious problem because this is a person who, on many issues, takes a very balanced position, but when he sees the pensions that public servants receive versus what people get in the private sector, and I'm not defending his position, but I think it's a real position and a real issue in this country at this point in time, which is being used politically. And I'd just like to have a little bit of discussion about whether and how the reality of pension envy should be dealt with.
Well, I think one of the things, and I've been in the private sector most of my life, some in the public sector, so pension is really, unless I keep running for the next 40 years, it's not going to really do anything for me. But my wife is in the public sector, and has been for going on, I don't know, 25, 26 years. And it's a discussion she's had with many of our friends and neighbors. I think something that really gets lost in that discussion is how much the individual public servants contribute out of their income to those pensions, right? Those pensions are not magical. You don't suddenly retire and a pot of money is found. Everybody from, the most lowly clerk up to the management level contributes significant dollars out of every paycheck to create that pension. And usually when she has that discussion, and sometimes she'll even pull out her paycheck and show how much of it is going into the pension, that usually ends that discussion.
I'm with PIPS, Professional Institute of Public Service. We have stats to show that public service, on average, we contribute 50% of the premium towards the pension. In the private sector, in those people lucky enough to have pensions in the private sector, the average that they contribute is 7% of their premiums. So, so our argument is just that, and also that we don't want to remove our pensions. We want everybody to have a pension, right? So it's stupid to attack us and say, oh, you're too good. We want to make an argument that everybody should have a proper pension.
So you're arguing for an evidence-based discussion?
Well, that would help.
So when you have envy, you're always supposed to want what you don't have instead of have the person who's got more than you get rid of that and come down to what you've got. Like, that makes no sense, right? We need to aspire to better. So when I first came in, I remember a statistician telling me that, you know what, the public sector pension for the federal government, it's because of the size of the pool, that as long as we've got water coming to the mill, so we'll have to have, this size of a public sector, so much percent, in order to make the whole thing viable. The problem is that if you've got a government that wants to reduce the size of the public sector from 300,000 employees to 200,000 employees, okay, well, we're going to have a crisis, because that's not as much water coming, that's not as much contributors, as you expected. The public sector is supposed to be stable, all right? Give or take a few percent here and there, you cut here, you cut there. But if you're going to get rid of 1/3 of the public servants, over time, guess what? There's not going to be as much critical mass there in terms of money going in and money going out. There's going to be a heck of a lot more money going out from all the people who are now retired. So you need to have kept that level pretty stable, and that is a problem. But I don't think so far the chief actuary says there's not a real crisis with the pension fund. So, why tinker with it? There's all kinds of political reasons for that.
Okay, and we just have a question over here. Did you,
Yeah, sure.
Eric, sir?
Larry, you talked about the politics being the biggest challenge for the public service. Can you talk a little bit about the challenges of mobilizing your membership politically?
Politics. I mean, the fact is that never has the level of fear been so high. So people do not want to come out to rallies. People do not want to be seen to be taking any kind of position.
So how are you meeting that challenge?
Well, I think that we're trying to find more creative ways of getting people to get involved. Thank goodness we've got these computers and stuff, so there's a lot of stuff going on online. People can get the information that they need without coming out to listen to a speech necessarily. So the information is getting out there. Our concern, as far as the PSAC is concerned, and the other unions as well, is how do we get rid of these people? So we're political. I mean, the unions are totally political. The whole thing is we're supposed to be about collective bargaining and labor relations, but we've noticed that this is not sustainable. We're going right off the cliff with this. So we've got to get rid of the government. So get the message out there. Make sure that your members understand what they have to do. Don't you tell me that you're going to vote and you haven't checked to see if you're registered, all right? There are things that you need to do, and let's make sure, because if 100% of the 100,000 public service employees in the National Capital Region vote, as opposed to 50,000 who voted in the last election, if 100,000, that's a game changer, all right? And then if you get all of them to tell their families and everybody to vote, so if we can get the people out there to vote, get out the vote, that'll be a game changer and we believe that a change of government will make a huge difference for the public service.
Okay, oh, sorry.
Something rotten and stupid, it motivates our members to push back even more. And so
Sorry, I-
actually they're feeding, you know.
Yeah.
it's working.
We're into the debate, folks.
Yes. Unfortunately, we have, that's all the time we have. Okay, we have one more
Daryl?
question. Hugh Windsor? Go ahead.
Nobody that I have met in the last, 3 years, believes the reasons given for killing the long-form census. So what, given by Clement and others.
Yeah.
So nobody believes that. It's just totally
Hogwash.
incredible.
Yeah.
So what was the real reason that they killed the long-form census?
Go ask the Aboriginals. Go ask every community in this country who depends on that information to get funding. The whole thing about the long-form census, folks, was that, now remember, the census was always run by the social statistics branch of the agency, okay? Why? Because we're asking people information about you, your family, and what you do and what you earn. We need that social data in order to drive our social programs. If you have a government that's not interested in funding social programs, well, what do? You get rid of the data that's causing the funding to occur. And so when they came out and said we're getting rid of the long-form census, which was obligatory, 1 out of 5 households, and then you try to convince the people, well, you know what, we're going to have a national household survey completely voluntary, and then you ask the deputy minister of the agency, the chief statistician, to go on record to say there'll be no effect on the data. You know, the data will be just as reliable. We lost 2 chief statisticians because of that. Ivan Feleghi, who had no intention of retiring. 6 months before he left, he told me, look, as long as I can climb the stairs, 26 flights, and he was almost 80 years old. He said, as long as I can climb the stairs going up and then go back down, I'll be in this job as long as, they want me. 6 months later, he was gone. Why? Because he refused to fall. He refused to fall for that and say no effect on the data. And the person who replaced him, Munir Sheikh, refused the same thing, to say the same thing. He said, I'm sorry, Mr. Prime Minister, I cannot say that. And he resigned, okay? So it was purely political. It was extremely strategic, and right now we have lost the frame so that even if we reinstate the census, which I think would be the first item on the agenda for a Mulcair or a Trudeau government, it would be to reinstate it. But that gap is there, and we are going to have to live with it for the next 30, 40 years. It's unfortunate, but it's
I'm
true.
just gonna have to stop
I'm
you there.
sorry.
That's okay. So that's the end of the discussion today. Thank you so much for the panelists who came to talk to us. And we have some wine before anyone.
We can continue the conversation. There you go. That's a great idea.
Yes.
Thank you. All right.